to talk of Christ, faith, family, and adventure. I'm Steve Hunt and hosting this panel, this open faith discussion, where today we're talking about whether our reaction to the sex therapist being tried at a membership council, potentially excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Her name is Natasha Helfer. And I just, previous to this live video, put out another live video explaining kind of my own thoughts on this matter. So I'm not going to go into immense detail right here about what I think. I just want to get the ball rolling, invite comments from everybody else on the panel. But I, in short, wrote a letter to Stake President Daley, who is overseeing that membership council, that was just really personal about my own history with pornography and masturbation, and how I visited and used and received great help from professional sex therapists and counselors that I just really couldn't find in the church, and how I needed help overcoming my negative self-talk and my OCD behaviors and some other areas where the focus that these counselors did and helped me with was on my thought process and my thinking, and not necessarily on helping me, just stop the sins, which then when I was able to think differently about these things and to realize that I'm not evil just because I am sexual and have natural sexual tendencies, then I didn't gravitate towards evil things or other evil thoughts because I realized that I'm not evil. Anyway, that's a very short and cut version of what I shared in my letter to President Daley. And then I've also shared in that video, that if you watch that on this channel that I posted just previously, about how it seems like a hard line to go ahead and start excommunicating people or to try people for teaching whatever it is they're supposed to be teaching based on their education, experience, and training in their professional lives. We've got all kinds of reasons why it just wouldn't make sense to start saying, well, you can't be a sex therapist and be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you can't be a professional scientist or whatever. And so I made comments on those things. But that being said, I also want to point out it is always the right of every church or religious organization to decide what will be preached over its pulpits, what is the doctrine of that church, and who essentially gets to claim to be a member of the church. And so while they have that right, it can, I just watch my other video. If you have more questions about what I believe, I'm being very short with it here. And I just wanted to start that by expressing it. But now I want to invite Jackson Washburn, who has also shared some of his thoughts already online, to share with the group a little bit about those. And then everybody else, who I don't believe any of the rest of you have publicly already shared your position, then you can jump in after we've heard these short versions of the positions that have already been shared. Jackson?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it sounds like we probably sent very similar letters into the stake president in terms of content. There are a lot of voices. There's a lot of I don't know. Maybe noise isn't the best way to characterize it, but there's a lot of excitement generated around high-profile excommunications, and so it can be. I can feel conflicted at times in the extent to which I would like to weigh into those things. In the case of Natasha Helfer, I did feel like I wanted to share my own personal experiences with like non-addiction model approaches to the kinds of issues that Natasha commonly helps her clientele treat. So I felt like it was important for me to do that. I tried to be careful in my remarks and not recommending a particular course of action or resolution to the situation. I understand that it's difficult for all parties involved. And like you do, Steve, that institutions have the right to, kind of keep and enforce their own boundaries how they see fit. But I will say that, this has been causing me to think about things in new ways. for instance, I think it would probably be best. I don't know. I definitely. I've been thinking about the local aspect of membership councils or excommunications, and it seems, historically speaking, that in the case of high-profile excommunications, that local leadership is put in an unfortunate position of not just representing the church, but also being put under flack for kind of gatekeeping the church's boundaries, right? And when you have exceptionally high profile individuals who are able to rally a lot of individuals, who are able to draw a lot of publicity and attention to the event, it can perhaps bring about like undue attention to otherwise like nominal um, uh, local leaders. So I've been thinking about that and how that might be changed if perhaps a truly like more transparent top-down approach to membership councils would be better. But yeah, in the case of Natasha, there's a lot of people who the situation hits different chords for them, and their responses are different. But at least in my personal case, I felt like writing a letter that carefully talked about my own experiences and how they relate to just a few of the listed points, not all of them, that were included in her kind of a membership council summons. I felt like that's something that I was comfortable contributing to this situation. So
I had something I wanted to say. Yes, Corey actually just asked on the chat, can someone sum up what her position is? That's what I was thinking from the beginning. I don't think we can have, can you hear me?
Can I? Yeah. No, can I go ahead and jump in and do that for you real quick? I mean,
Sure.
and then you can respond there. I did this a little bit in my video. That's why I didn't do it here. That was the other thing I addressed directly was at least she claims that, and it's hard to do this when you don't get to hear the other side, right? You don't get to hear the arguments of the church. You don't get to hear exactly why they're accusing her of apostasy or whatever. You only get her saying, this is what they told me they're accusing me of. And she says that what they are is first that she supports same-sex marriage. And I don't know exactly how she supported it or what her position is, but my guess would simply be probably that she just like
I was thinking maybe we should just read what she said instead of trying to characterize it.
Well, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Do you have it?
Good. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I have the thing here. She says the specific issues that they brought to my attention that are being considered misconduct are 1, my support for same-sex marriage, 2, my educational attempts to teach that masturbation is part of a normative sexual development journey and should not be seen as a sin or used as a reason to keep our youth considered and then unworthy or to serve in church activities. There's a little bit of a anyway, I'm not sure. Anyway, okay. Number 3, my stances on sexually explicit materials or pornography. I assume by which they mean that I've been educating on the difference between a values model versus an addiction model and the treatment of such concerns. So she's not exactly certain even there what they're accusing her of. They probably just said your stance on sexually explicit materials. And she has to guess what that is. And then that she's been critical of church leaders, which I'll point out that she says that she's just encouraged them. I think she's just encouraged them to get more educated. And then finally, that there are concerns that I've encouraged people to leave the church. And she claims that she absolutely hasn't done that. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's excellent. I don't think we can talk, first of all, I don't think we can talk specifically about this case. And I think we all agree on this about whether or not she should or shouldn't be excommunicated, because we won't be privy to any of the evidence or information that comes out at this hearing or counsel. And so we're not talking about that. I think it's important to limit the discussion. We're talking about
it seems to be this idea. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, just if a generally a sex therapist who teaches the sex therapist education line, if that right there is worthy of excommunication.
Even more broadly, I think the question is, are there certain professions whose requirements conflict with being a good member of the Church of Jesus Christ or of any church? And if so, can you pursue those callings,
other than the
those
oldest
professions? Well, yeah. And so that's, if you go to the extreme example, you can't be a prostitute, you can't be a drug dealer, You can't be a murderer for hire. You can't do anything illegal, right? Whether it's a profession or not. But this gets to the question of professional ethics as some kind of loophole within normal morality. I mean, this is a giant question. And there's tons of writing, at least in the legal profession, about whether you can do things that wouldn't, under normal circumstances, be kind things and still be a good lawyer. Whether you can wither a witness with cross-examination, publicly embarrass them, lead people to believe something in a way that you know that they're taking it perhaps that's not true or something. I mean, these are all things within my profession, the legal profession, that people justify. Whether or not they're right or not, I'm not trying to say, but the question of whether you can be a therapist and a good LDS, card-carrying member seems easy. And then you say, well, what about a sex therapist? Well, what about a sex therapist whose education has led them to believe that, these things, these positions that she advocates for or stands for or teaches are correct, normal, mental health promoting positions? What do you do if your profession conflicts with the teachings of the church? And particularly in this kind of a profession where she owes a duty of care to her patients, that she use data-driven, methods. And if in fact that is what these are, and I don't know. So again, we're speaking all hypothetically here. This isn't just because we're using her case as an example. It's just hypothetical about, well, what do you do in this situation? The other thing that's important to define from the outset is, I think she said that her excommunication summons, or whatever you would call it, it indicated that she would be on trial for apostasy. Did it not? Was apostasy the word? No? Maybe I'm looking at the wrong.
I don't think that's what it was.
Okay.
I'll have to go back. So she says in her interview, in the letter that she received, they said they were going to be convening a council to determine her membership based on certain stances, right? And then that there's the 5 different issues, and then they're like, this is going to happen whether you're here or not. You're invited to attend if you'd like to, have
okay. Well, I don't know.
Like
there's a whole bunch of kind of quasi legal proceedings in any organization, really, but certainly in the church. And they take kind of a form of legality, but deny the power thereof. In a disciplinary council where they're talking about somebody losing their membership, they issue a summons which kind of complies with what we would normally consider to be due process notice requirements. And that summons has to have enough, I would think, in order to be fair, enough specificity. I'm trying not to sound too legal. I just got to notice that I'm sounding a little legal here. The thing is that there's mirror images here. So it might sound a little legal, but I am not purporting to give any legal position, any legal opinion, or anything like that on what's going on in this case. So like I said, you need to have enough specificity in what you're being charged with so that you can appropriately speak to that issue, defend yourself. So in disciplinary councils, there may be a charge of apostasy, which has to be defined so that it has elements so you can determine whether or not you're in apostasy. I don't know if that's what she's being charged with or if it's something else, but I can't imagine that simply being told you're taking these positions is an excommunicable offense without being kind of gathered under the umbrella of, and that's apostasy. Do you know what I mean? Apostasy is defined in the handbook, at least it was previously, I don't know if it is anymore, as teaching or following incorrect doctrines or, quote, repeatedly acting in clear and open and deliberate public opposition to the church or its leaders. So, you'll have to break that down. Teaching or following incorrect doctrines. Okay, if you teach something, but you don't present it as a doctrine, is it an incorrect doctrine? If you say, this is what science says or social science says, but I'm not telling you this is the doctrine of the church, is that an incorrect doctrine? Good question.
Yeah, you're not saying this is what Jesus says. You're saying this is what the science says.
Right. Second, repeatedly acting. So you're going to have to establish a course of conduct in clear, open, and deliberate and public. You'll have to define all those things. Opposition to the church. And the question of whether she's teaching these things privately or conveying them in private one-on-one therapy sessions, all that should be relevant. But as Jackson said, it might not be, because you're kind of at the mercy of what some people have maybe derisively referred to as local authority roulette. And so you get who you get on these things, and they may or may not have any inherent respect for concepts of due process notice or of sticking within the bounds of what's been charged, or of producing any evidence on the subject. And that's just the way it is.
Unfortunately, it's probably going to be more emotional, a more appeal to what does God tell me with my heart and my mind and my emotions right now, should this person be a member of the church, regardless of anything you just said.
Right. And also a question of, well, how sorry do they seem? Are they willing to change whatever it is that they're doing? Do they have a right, something analogous to the right to silence? I don't know. Do they have to speak of these things? I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and brag for a second that I've never been the subject of a church disciplinary court, so I don't know. But I know people who have.
White privilege, white male cis
Yeah,
privilege.
I know. This is my straight white male privilege coming out. Anyway, I know people who have, and they have not always felt that the proceedings were very fair. And so I understand that this kind of thing can be a problem. But in the abstract, going away from this exact case, I think the question arises, if your profession, if you feel that you owe a duty in your profession, whether it's to a client, to to a boss, to something, and that may not be exactly the kind of the church party line on a doctrine, are you committing apostasy or an otherwise excommunicable offense by doing what is required of you in that circumstance? Now, certainly we've talked about, there are professions where you can't hide, professional morality behind the shield of professional morality. Like, for example, well, I'm a hitman. I get paid to kill people, so it's okay, right? On the other hand, that gets complicated because there are things like war, but then we're talking about whether it's legal or not. Anyway, so I'm going to stop talking now, but I think that's the bigger question for today is, what do you do in those situations? Is she wrong or right that she should do what she feels is her duty and standard of care, even if it conflicts with what the church teachings are on these subjects?
Another one, for an example, would be if you're an actor and you're to portray whatever kind of immoral activity in front of the camera, right?
Right.
I have a couple questions. I won't talk long. I just wanted to, an observation and some questions just about this particular case. I'll admit, I've read the news stories, but I haven't taken a deep dive and I haven't listened to her Mormon Stories interview or anything, so I'll need your help. But so from my observations of what, people, these high profile cases seem to be called in for, it seems like that reaches a tipping point a lot of times in the church for, if these people have been teaching whatever it is that they deem as apostasy publicly, and not just teaching it publicly, that they have a substantial amount of followers and they're influencing people, such as on social media or through a podcast or a public protest like the Sam Harris case, and that at least, and this isn't, I'm not trying to say this is what's actually happening, but it may seem to the church that the person is maintaining their membership only for purposes of maintaining what I'll call street cred with actual members, because we must admit as members of the church that there is a certain gravitas that you lose once you're exed, basically. So John Dehlin, for example, he was in for a long time, and I listened to his podcast a long time ago when it was like more of just like, let's talk about these issues and stuff. But there came a point when it was, at least to me, it seemed like he was just kind of maintaining that just so he could have a pull in a certain audience. And I think the church is maybe feeling that in this situation. I'm not aware, but I have read some things where, and again, like, your testimony hopefully isn't something that gets you excommunicated, because we all struggle with that to some degree and in some way. But I guess just that. Does she have a big public following and or a public following, or is she like what's her name? There's another person I'm thinking might get some disciplinary counsel soon. What's her name? She's a psychologist with the last name Hanks. I don't remember her first name, but yeah.
It's like Julianne or something.
Julie Hanks. Yeah. Okay. So, because she's related to one of my friends actually, but anyway, so people like that like are saying things, and then it starts subtle, but then you start being more open. You're like, I don't really believe I don't know. It's hard because I consider myself a nuanced believer, and I have a podcast that I haven't updated in a while, but anyway, but I had worried at the beginning sometimes, because sometimes we're faithful, obviously, and it's a way apologetic almost podcast sometimes of the church, but there are times when we openly share, like, yeah, we think that this is against what the church is actually taking some positions that aren't scriptural, or I think the main one that I was concerned with was one time we critiqued a Ensign article by then Elder Nelson, who's now the prophet of the church, about divine love, and he said it was conditional. We had like a big critique of that, and I had a position that was I strongly against what he was saying. And though we did come around to saying, like, you could take it in this way, but it was kind of against it. Anyway, so I'm just wondering, does she fit those criteria? And what is your observation as well? Like, when does the church seem to go after these high profile people? Do you think it's kind of what I'm saying, once they have followers and influence? Because I don't think they'd have, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they'd even know about it if she didn't have some sort of public influence. If she was literally just doing it in one-on-one private therapy sessions, I don't think it would be an issue.
Well, it could be that if she had clients who were then going to their priesthood authorities and saying, look, my therapist is telling me this is fine. And they go, well, who's your therapist? Because I could imagine that happening, unfortunately. And if they were to say, well, it's so-and-so who's in this ward or the next ward over or something, and they go, well, I'm going to tell her priesthood authority about that. I mean, it's just possible that could happen. I don't know if this would have been a high-profile disciplinary situation because she has a following, or because the local leadership decided, well, we're going to call her in for disciplinary counsel, and then she went public with it. I don't know. By the way, just so everybody knows, I wasn't completely making stuff up. I did see in the KUTV news article that I had read on this before, the only thing I've read, it says Helfer says she is facing charges of apostasy for her teachings, which are in line with mental health professionals. So that's where that came from. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But that's why I had that idea. So, Corey, I think at least my answer to your question is, I don't know, or it's a question and answer to your question. I don't know if this was high profile before or after the disciplinary council was called. Either way, I imagine it's kind of a headache for the church right now to be under this kind of scrutiny with their disciplinary proceedings. I don't know of any organization that likes their disciplinary proceedings to be scrutinized. It's just, it's a messy area where organizations are very liable to make missteps. The question is whether those missteps result in any kind of legal liability or anything, or just bad blood with, the local kind of milieu. Stephen said earlier, I call him Stephen because he's my brother. Steve said earlier that, he very much supports that any private group, church, etc., has the legal ability to control its membership. That's true. And so for the most part, there are certain exceptions to that. Of course, you can't be discriminating against protected classes and things like that. But I would think that the church is probably not looking at, that's where I'm going to stop that thought.
All right, I'll hop in for some clarity. So I got probably over halfway through the Mormon Stories interview before I was able to hop on. So she definitely has a following. She's actually some way, and maybe Jackson, you could clarify how she's a member in some way of the Open Stories Foundation, which is the umbrella of Mormon Stories, and Mormon Matters used to be under there, and a lot of other podcasts. She actually has her own podcast on there. I believe it's called Mormon Mental Health Association or something like that. So definitely there's a following. She really got put on the map, or at least on the church's radar rather, in 2009, because in her interview she says that fast offerings are actually, and this is something I actually didn't know before I heard the interview. It shows you how involved I am with fast offerings, but fast offerings can help cover mental health costs for people that are suffering. And she said that, you know, fast offerings used to help pay for her clients' services, so, right, so that she could provide them counseling and things like that. But in 2009, she wrote a article on masturbation and about how it's a normal sexual thing that happens as you're growing up. And after that came out, she noticed she had a number of clients that were members of the church saying, you know what, this is no longer going to be covered with fast offerings, and I can't afford it anymore, so I can no longer come. That was like the first bump in the road, but throughout the interview, right, there's a few touch points here and there, but I think that's probably where she kind of got put under the radar. And then I'm not sure exactly what led to things coming up right now after the pandemic. Like I said, I didn't get quite to the end of the interview, but so it sounds like they've kind of put a watchful eye on her. I'm not sure how far to the top this went, but at least at local leadership, and enough to deny fast offerings going to covering client services for client fees for her services.
Has anyone listened to her podcast and knows the type of things she's saying? Because like I unfortunately am a little ignorant, but I mean, is she speaking against? I mean, I know the church's stance would be like, you know, boys, even though your hands happen to go about there, and when you're growing up, naturally at some point that's probably going to happen. But like, is she saying like the church is I would guess, because from what I've heard of other church, or not church, of sex therapists, they're saying like what the church is teaching is harmful, and it actually is leading you away from what God intended for you, or something like that. Is it like that? I'm just trying to understand like what is she saying that's so offensive, other than, you know, masturbation is natural and you should have a better relationship with you and your sexual self.
From the portion of the interview that I heard, she did say that not just about masturbation, but, you know, LGBTQ issues and things like that, as well, as that not only is this something that is outdated, it's actually harmful to clients. But she opens up and says, like, there's a lot of therapists, not just sex therapists, psychologists, people that, you know, just aren't specialized in certain areas, that are unwillingly doing harm. And I think she thinks of it more of like they're unwillingly doing this, like they're not aware of it, but I'm trying to bring awareness to it so that this will stop. Where I think something that's interesting to me was the is it the KUTV article, or the KUTV article, is they include the little tagline at the end that this is what she's doing is in line with mental health science. And what I'm seeing is that we have this, what seems to be this ever-growing divide between religion and science, right? You have a lot of people that when they become atheists, they decide to start saying, I believe in science, almost like that's their new faith, even though obviously, right, we've listened to Daniel, not all of them do that, but I've heard that time and again, and it feels like, right, to Dave's issue, if we're coming to this thing where it's like, okay, if we have things that are purportedly being certified by science, is like, this is the way we should do things, and you know, this is a best practice. She also talks about best practices. She says, I want to teach best practices. There's a lot of other things you could do. Like for some people, emotional distress and things like that, you can go do tarot card reading, but that's not a best practice that I can recommend to everyone and that is scientifically backed. What do we do when things that are purportedly scientifically backed conflicting and in direct contradiction to a church doctrine? And this would be, right, this comes to the crux of the question. Do I have to now choose between a profession that could be a clinical profession and my faith, because science is going one way and my faith seems to not be going the other way, but not moving on a stance that it's taken, and it's saying, you know what, this is seemingly a hill that we're willing to die on.
And by the way, that the more pedestrian maybe way that this arises is in something like, well, what if you are a public school teacher and you are required to teach any kind of curriculum that you feel conflicts with your religious beliefs? What do you have there? Are you able to say, well, if I choose not to teach this and I get fired, I've been discriminated against by my employer for my religious beliefs? Or, you know, anyway, so those are interesting legal questions that are very case and fact specific and are not all really cut and dry, but I think it's an aspect of this kind of thing. Sorry, go ahead, Joey.
Oh, I don't know exactly any specific comment that's going to be intelligent sounding for this. I mean, I just can't say. I mean, it's kind of fun being a fly on the wall, hearing a lot of Latter-day Saints talking about this case, because I'm from the outside looking in, right? So like one comment that I have is, I think a lot of evangelicals especially will find all of this talk very foreign, because not a lot of church discipline happens in evangelical circles. There aren't disciplinary councils in the non-denominational church down the street from me, right? If they even do membership at all, I don't know if they do, right? People just go to church there. They're not even members of the church necessarily, right? What does it even mean to be a member of a church? The tradition that I am in now, and that I feel a conviction about this, the Presbyterian tradition, does care about church discipline and membership. And the Presbyterian form of church government is, so the Episcopalian, it would be like top down, right? The Pope at the top and then bishops, right? The congregational is like bottom up, and a lot of non-denominational churches are congregational, where the church is independent of any other neighboring churches, and pretty much it's probably just the pastor of the church is kind of in charge of everything that happens there. Maybe they have a deacon board that votes on major decisions, whatever. But if the pastor decides that you're out, or the pastor makes a decision about the way the church should spend its money or whatever, the buck kind of stops at him. There's no one you can appeal to, like a higher court, right? The Presbyterian form of church government is like in the middle of that. It's like a representative form of church government, kind of. There is a body of elders at my church. If the elders at my church decided that I was needing to be excommunicated for some reason, which they might do, we practice church discipline. If there's some reason that someone needs to be disfellowshipped or excommunicated, it could happen. But if that happens, there's a higher court that I can appeal to. There's the presbytery, which is a grouping of local churches right here in the Salt Lake Valley, that if my local elders made a decision that I didn't agree with, that I could appeal to the presbytery, the local presbytery, and then they could independently, try to verify the evidence, and they would hold a court basically between me and the elders of my church. And if they found that the elders of my church had some misconduct, then they would take disciplinary action against them and reinstate my membership, right? And so that's maybe one thing I would comment on first, is just, you guys talk about the local authority roulette. And is there any higher court? If she does get excommunicated by her local authorities, is there a higher court she can appeal to? I don't know. Since the case has gained a lot of notoriety, I wonder if her local leaders are already in touch with general authorities on the matter, and they're going to take their counsel. They're probably not going to make the decision just locally, just because of the high profile nature of this case. So maybe if she does get excommunicated, it's already too late. If she tried to appeal to that higher authority, well, guess what? That higher authority was the ones that made that decision, right? I echo what you guys have already said here, that we don't know the other side of this. If she's hanging out with John DeLynn and making podcasts about stuff, like, has she already got one foot out the door? And is this just kind of a formality? And is she ginning it up for drama, because it's more publicity for her podcast and stuff? I don't know. When I resigned my own church membership, which was actually only just a couple of years ago, you read stories on the internet about bishops who won't let you resign your church membership, and everything on the internet is like, you got to lawyer up, get a lawyer, have them send a letter straight to church headquarters. You really have to fight them on this, right? And I was like, is that really true? Do I really have to fight them? And I don't know, maybe I just got lucky. You talk about like you said, local leadership roulette. Maybe I just got lucky, but I looked up what the normal process is. And the normal process is you just talk to your local bishop. And so I just called up my local bishop and I said, hey, can I come and talk with you? And I wrote up a short little letter, and I walked in and said, I got to know the guy a little bit, handed him my letter, he read the letter, asked me one or two questions, but then he was like, well, you seem like your mind is made up. So, and then he said, I've never actually done one of these before. Let me look up how to do this. He pulled out the church handbook and kind of read through, and he said, oh, it says here I'm supposed to fill out this form for you and mail that off, and then I'll get a response back. And it says here I'm supposed to let you know, so I'll do that. And the whole thing was very cordial. He was a very polite guy. Weirdly, toward the end of our conversation, we ended up swapping mission stories. It was an interesting little 30-minute conversation.
He almost got you back.
Well, anyway, it was, I found the whole process awfully pleasant, and so maybe, like I said, maybe I just got lucky, but like I tend to be, even though I've rejected the faith tenets of the Latter-day Saint religion, but I tend to have a lot of faith in people, and I don't think these leaders are out to get her, or I don't know, maybe they are. I have no idea. I have no idea, but I would tend to be more optimistic about they're probably doing this for a really good reason, and maybe she's not being as forthcoming about what's really going on, because she's got her own audience that she's grooming, and we don't know both sides of this story. But so I don't know. Did I just side with the LDS authorities?
No. I want to. I know I've talked a lot, but let me jump in first. Everything that you said. First of all, I loved your comment. Great comment. Everything you said about this particular case is what I was trying to say at the beginning, that we just don't know what will or should happen as to whether or not Ms. Helfer will be excommunicated or should be. We just don't know. There's too much information we don't have, so we're not commenting on that. We don't know whether she wants to be an active member or an inactive member. We don't know whether this is for publicity for her and she's, she likes us. We don't know. We don't know whether she cares if she's being excommunicated or not. But the question I think that we need to deal with, or that has broader appeal, is in this situation where someone is being brought to a disciplinary council ostensibly for doing their job, and that job is not the kind of job that we would say is incompatible necessarily with being a Christian or a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is that a good hill to die on for church discipline in the news? It's so we're kind of definitely flying blind on her case.
Eliminate all specifics to her case now, since we don't really know them. And yeah, what are your guys' thoughts? A couple minutes each on just the general idea of, this. Can we have a profession that ostensibly takes positions or participates in activities that might be against church policy or doctrine or whatever? Another example I just thought of, we thought of several, but another one that came across my radar once was, whether you own a corner drugstore, supermarket thing that sells cigarettes and alcohol,
yeah,
or whether you own a casino. Can you own these kinds of things? Where do you say that your career, you are in a profession that is not acceptable to the Lord's church?
And it's all just shades of gray, because we can talk about, well, what about working on Sunday as a newspaper boy? I mean, obviously there is tolerance in being a faithful LDS church member for some degree of deviation from all of the, party line positions of the church. But I think it's when you're, and maybe this is kind of the Alma the Younger exception of, it's one thing for me to go around living my life, but I was leading other people astray, says Alma the Younger in the Book of Mormon. This is a Book of Mormon character for anybody who doesn't know, who was later, visited by an angel, and he had a miraculous conversion story, very much like Saul or Paul in the New Testament. But in his particular case, he points out that the worst part of what he was doing was he was actually leading others astray. He calls it murdering their spirits. And so maybe that's the difference between saying, okay, yeah, maybe you have to do some things in your job that aren't necessarily in line, and that's between you and God. But when you start teaching other people and leading them, quote unquote, astray, again, I'm not commenting on Miss Helfer here or whether what she said was in fact doing that. I'm certainly not saying it was murdering people's spirits, but maybe that's kind of the flavor of where the church draws the line and says, look, we can't have you teaching other people, especially if she's living in Utah, where you're teaching other church members to do things that we're teaching them not to do. That's a problem, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll share a little. I think probably the best example of a profession that I could see both being legal while also being deemed unacceptable probably would be if someone is like, let's say, like, I don't know, a full-time abortion doctor and routinely carried out elective abortions. I feel like that would be a profession in which one could be compliant with quote unquote best practices, with different methods of providing sound medical or scientifically driven procedures to individuals. I imagine that one would probably be scrutinized pretty heavily by church leaders, or wouldn't be looked upon with a huge degree of leniency or fondness. In the case of Natasha, there's a lot. There are many LDS sex therapists that basically teach very similar things that she does with respect to grounding certain paradigms and behavioral practices in established social science. And I do think that one of the unspoken differences, though, at least with respect to her membership council summons, is that she does have a following. She is associated with high profile defectors and excommunicated persons from the church. And at least as far social media is a huge part of her professional approach, where she runs this podcast that she's been doing for years. And that all just provides a lot of space for her to publicly criticize church leaders to an extent that puts her in a different category than many other LDS sex therapists. And so even if her association to Mormon Stories or John DeLynn, or her online presence wasn't stated in her summons, I still think that that's like an unspoken driving factor here. And I guess one of my reasons for writing in like I did is that, even though there are many aspects of this, the context and whatnot, in which, I find myself feeling uncomfortable or not totally being in the same boat as a lot of other people with respect to response and outrage, I still have some worry that because the narrative currently being popularized is that this is her profession being brought under attack by the church, that there are other individuals who could be perhaps summoned on similar grounds, that aren't engaging in a lot of the same behaviors as she is, but that might prove to be detrimental on the well-being of the LDS therapeutic community. So I am concerned about some of the perhaps unintended side effects that could come about as a result of this particular membership council.
Thanks. Who wants to give a couple minutes to wrap up your thoughts on this idea? Joey?
Yeah, so to Dave's specific question, I do think you're right, Dave, that we make allowance for so much gray area in terms. Yeah, you're right. I agree with you. I agree with Dave, everybody. This is unprecedented. We should crack open a champagne
here.
bottle
Thank
or
you.
something, except none of you guys will drink it with me. I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of gray area that we allow for people to do things in a professional setting that that may or may not be agreeable with their faith and ethic and moral, whatever. And so if the real reason they're going after Miss Helfer is because of her profession and the things that she's teaching from a scientific standpoint, then I think they're probably in the wrong, or at least walking on really, really unsure footing, right? They're walking into a dangerous area. Because are we going to start excommunicating all sex therapists, or all mental health professionals? Are we going to start excommunicating anybody who works at the liquor store or runs a corner drugstore? No, we're not. That's just crazy. I would suspect that the real reason she's being brought to this disciplinary council is because of her prominence as a podcaster and all this other stuff. And if that's the real reason, and if the summons didn't mention it, that's awfully disingenuous, and that's, I think, to be criticized. If that's the real reason and it was mentioned and she's being coy about that being mentioned in all of her, if she's trying to spin it like, oh, they're after me because I'm a sex therapist, right? Then that might be the spin she's putting on it. And maybe that's the narrative that's being driven, because that's the more sensational narrative, right? I don't know, but I think, I mean, this is uncontroversial with you guys probably, but I would say, yeah, if the real reason they're going after her is because of her work as a therapist, that's pretty dangerous. And they, yeah, anyway, so that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree there. Obviously, if this is something that is just targeting what's going on in a professional setting, right? Everyone's stated it, and so I don't need to rehash that. I do think that what you were talking about, Joey, where if this is something where in the summons, I think that what you were mentioning, if it wasn't mentioned, it actually would be mentioned, not in detail, but it would probably fall under criticizing church leaders. That's kind of, I think they're saying like, oh, everything that you're saying with all the podcasts and the people that you're with.
That was one of the ones that was mentioned.
Yep. And there were 5 things, and she accepted 4 of them. And one of them was criticizing church leaders. She's like, no, I've done that. I do that repeatedly, but in a professional way, that because I want them to be more constructive. Whether they view that as like, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, this over here where you said that the prophet is wrong, or this over here where you said the excommunication. I'm not saying she actually said those things, but she could be talking about, hey, I'm defending on this point. And they're thinking, yeah, that's not what we're worried about. This is what we're worried about. Like I was saying before, what I see here is a wider gulf that's happening probably in the future is when what's considered scientifically sound and anything that goes against that is not a best practice is no longer acceptable to become an issue, especially in the future. Especially if someone looks to science and says, this is black and white. Science says this is the way it is, and that's the way we have to go, rather than, science, like a lot of religions, is evolving. It's changing. The science, even 10 years ago, in a lot of different realms, looks completely different than it does today. So to say, if you're doing anything different than here, and to go back on religions and other people and say, like, what you're doing is archaic, this is stupid, I can see, unfortunately, both sides growing further apart, and there being a lot more contention rather than coming together as a result of these types of understandings that are coming out. And from what I understand of science, right, there's a lot of different science, even though you can get like a broad consensus. Even a broad consensus, they're all over the board. And so to stick one and say like, well, what I'm doing is scientifically backed and it's considered best practice, and be like, yeah, but like, what were the dissenting opinions? What exactly is best practices? Those were just some of my thoughts on it, and being like, let's find a way to mesh these together. Not, I don't know. I guess I'll just stop there because I'm starting to ramble.
All right, so I just want to wrap up with, I want to take it back to what Dave said a second ago with this idea of, did you call it the Alma the Younger test, or?
Something like that. In fact, I think that the angel, when he appears to Alma in this retelling, says, if thou would of thyself be destroyed, but seek no more to destroy the church or the kingdom of God or something. So he basically says, you do you. This is how I read it. You do you, but stop misleading others is what. And so maybe that's, again, I'm not saying that Miss Helfer is guilty of that at all. I'm not getting into that. I'm just saying maybe that's where they draw the line.
Yeah, well, or maybe that's where they should draw the line, whether they do or don't, right? And I like that, because in my own personal study of the gospel, and just to share some of my own thoughts about the gospel of Jesus Christ, my opinion is that a whole lot of the gospel is based on love, and love your neighbor and love God, and leading people to Christ. And that there's a discussion there that Alma the Younger does with his son. Is it Coriantumr? Or Corianton? I forget the name now. Is it? Anyway. And so where he talks about how, yeah, he was going about to destroy the church, and how the angel came and everything, and where he says that he had done something that was worse in the sight of, no, I'm sorry, he was talking to Corianton. He's talking about how Corianton had done this, right? Where know you not that these things are worse than anything save shedding of innocent blood and denying the Holy Ghost and shedding of innocent blood. And I know this isn't exactly, this is the Corianton test. I'm taking it to the Alma the Younger, giving a similar test to his son here. And many people look at that story and say, okay, the third worst thing in the gospel, the third worst sin after denying the Holy Ghost, which to me means saying, I don't want to be saved, or I just don't believe that God can save me. And the thing, in my opinion, is that that's one of the worst things, because salvation depends wholly on your believing that Jesus Christ can save you and wanting him to do so. And if you, with your free will, which or influenced will, have decided you don't want Jesus to save you, and you decided that you don't believe you're savable, that's a problem. That's the first one. Number two, if you kill someone, that's a problem. And we all know that. But the third one is the third worst sin, sexual promiscuity or whatever, running around with the harlot Isabel. And I think that a nuanced reading of that story, and I'm not going to go into detail here, can show that he calls, he tells his son that he too had gone about murdering, as Dave said, the spirits. And it wasn't because of sexual sin. This third worst sin is leading people astray. And that Corianton, by engaging in his sexual sin while he was supposed to be a missionary, an example, and the son of the prophet or whatever, was leading people astray. And that not the sexual promiscuity, but the leading of other people away from Christ is such a dangerous thing, because just like saying, I don't believe that Christ can save me and I don't want him to save me is terrible for your own salvation, teaching other people that Christ can't save them and teaching them that they don't want Christ to save them is also terrible for their salvation. So I suppose that, yeah, it does seem like there should be, and there maybe is, a standard of, hey, you do you, like Dave said about Alma the Younger. But when you start actually leading and guiding other people away from the church and its teachings and prophets and whatever, you're really not a part of the church anymore, And again, we don't know if that's what she did, this specific case. But if you've got a profession where you're working on Sunday, where you're doing things that maybe selling, alcohol or liquor and cigarettes, or acting in front of a camera, and you're just doing you're doing your profession and otherwise trying to be upstanding, it seems like it probably shouldn't play a role in your membership in the church. But when you start to teach other people, maybe that's a good key. So, all right. Thanks so much for joining us today on this discussion, and hope everybody has a fantastic day.